Mark Anthony, you are so welcome to Livsenergi. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. It's such an honor to be here. And I'm so honored that my book, The Afterlife Frequency, is being released in Swedish. I'm very thankful.
Yeah. Thank you. We are too. And I want to show it to everyone. So we're on the same track at what kind of book it is that we are talking about here. So in Swedish, it's called Frekvenser från Andevärlden. So it's kind of a direct translation of the afterlife frequency. Yeah. So as I talked to you before about Mark, this kind of book is one of the top sellers for, and our audience is very, very interested in the subject of mediumship and connection to the spirit world. Can you tell us a little bit about the book? Just the small things, and we can dive deeper later on.
The Afterlife Frequency provides a sound scientific basis for all forms of spiritual contact. Alexandra, spirit communication is part of the human experience, and it can occur in many forms. It can be a visitation where you feel a loved one around, or you have a contact experience in a dream. It can be through a medium, like myself. It can occur during a near-death experience, a shared death experience, a deathbed vision, and an out-of-body experience. And so what the afterlife frequency does is it explains, based on sound scientific principles, how all of these phenomena are possible. And I do that through my electromagnetic soul theory, and we can talk about that in a few minutes. But that's essentially what the afterlife frequency is to do, is to bring spirit communication, mediumship, and all forms of spirit contact into the 21st century.
That's a good thing. So you are a medium. You
Yes.
are also judge, a lawyer. You're not a judge, you're a
No,
lawyer.
I'm not a judge. I'm an attorney.
Attorney.
Yes, I'm an attorney. I'm licensed to practice in Florida, Washington, D.C., and before the United States Supreme Court. I also, during my law school years, attended Oxford University in England. I've tried over 100 jury trials, represented thousands of people as a prosecutor, as a criminal defense attorney, and as a private attorney in complex civil litigation. And I had a specialization in brain injuries. And so when I started working full-time with my mediumship, I had to understand, how does this happen? And all the work that I'd done on studying the human brain, everything suddenly came together, because none of this is magic or hocus pocus. It's based on human physiology, it's based on frequency, and it's based on quantum physics. And yes, there is a faith and a spiritual element to it, but they're all interconnected.
Yeah. So how come this is a little bit next to everything, but how come this question about if mediumship and connection to the spirit world exist or not, how come this is still a question?
It's hard for people to believe.
Yeah.
When someone you love dies and you're looking at their lifeless body, and then in the aftermath of that person's death, they're not there physically. And people are so overwhelmed with grief, and we begin to think that that's it. And people of faith have always believed that we have a soul, a spirit, consciousness,
Mhm.
which pre-exists the body, comes into the body, and lives on after the body dies. And then people of faith, they're usually referred to as Newtonian reductionist materialists. And that stems from Sir Isaac Newton, the superstar of the Enlightenment back in the 17th century. And what's so fascinating about him, Alexandra, is the man essentially invented physics and modern science as we know it.
Mhm.
And he believed in God, but he didn't believe in an afterlife or a soul. And this is the man who invented calculus, the laws of optics, the laws of gravity, the laws of motion. But he spent more of his time studying the Bible, looking for hidden and encrypted messages than he did science. And I term that the Newton paradox, because here you have somebody who says there's God, but there's no afterlife, yet he spent more time studying the Bible than he did science, and this is the man who invented science.
Yeah.
And so in the wake of his passing, Newtonian reductive materialists, they believe that the only thing that exists, it has to be provable. Only something that is provable can exist. There's no God, there's no afterlife. Everything's made of molecules, which are in turn are made of atoms, and that's it. And so you've had faith in one corner and science in the other. But now, in the 21st century, we've had over 100 years of quantum physics. And now we're beginning to see energetically that faith and science are really discussing the same concepts, yet through different terminology.
So we are about to meet and be intertwined. Mm.
Yes. In the afterlife frequency, one of the key concepts is the electromagnetic soul.
Mm.
And
What is that? Tell us. We are. This is key.
this is it, the
Yeah.
electromagnetic soul. Every great belief system, whether it is Hinduism 5,000 years ago, Zoroastrianism of ancient Persia, Judaism with Moses, Christianity, Islam, Native American spirituality, the religions, belief systems of Africa and the Pacific have all talked about a spirit, a soul. And we refer to our consciousness. The consciousness is the who and what we are. In the realms of science, in philosophy and psychology, we call this consciousness. In the realms of faith, we refer to it as a soul or a spirit. But all of these belief systems agree that the soul pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. We know from the second law of thermodynamics and physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. We know from neuroscience, the study of the human brain, that the brain, while it's only 2% of the body's weight, it consumes over 20% of its electromagnetic energy. Now, we know everything's made of molecules, which in turn are made of atoms. The Newtonian reductive materialists will agree with us there. But what Sir Isaac Newton did not have was quantum physics, because over a century ago, Albert Einstein, Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, Louis de Broglie, to name just a few, they understood that there's molecules, atoms, which in turn are made of electrons, protons, and neutrons, which in turn are made of the smallest particle of electromagnetic energy, which is known as a quantum. And that is where we get the term quantum physics. So what that means, Alexander, is that you, me, the chairs we're sitting on, the radio waves that this program is being broadcast on, the rays of the sun, and the rings of Saturn and beyond are all at the subatomic level, all made of the same form of electromagnetic energy, which is a quantum. So after years of research, a lifetime of being a medium, I developed the term the electromagnetic soul, the EMS, to describe what we really are, which is pure consciousness that is eternal electromagnetic energy. But I'd like to take it one step further.
Please do.
Dr. Gary Schwartz from the University of Arizona, and I'm very honored that he wrote the foreword to my book. And he is one of the top afterlife researchers in the world. In fact, he's working on technology, electronic technology to communicate with spirits. He adopted the term electromagnetic soul, but he said, let's look at soul, S-O-U-L in English, to mean the source of universal love. So it's not just a technical explanation of our soul. It takes it even further because our soul is pure energy, and it is also the source of love.
And universe.
And the universe,
Yes.
absolutely.
Mm.
Well, and see, every belief system says that we're all interconnected. You know, Jesus said we're all the children of God. Buddha said this. Gandhi certainly did. One time there was a group of Hindus and Muslims. They were arguing, and he said, "Stop." He said, "We're all the children of God. Why do you raise your hands against your brothers and sisters simply because they call God by a different name?" And so, from a philosophical standpoint, yes, we understand that. But now we see from a quantum physics standpoint, it's true. We're all electromagnetic energy. In fact, one of the things that Albert Einstein said is that matter is light, light is energy, and that we are all light beings. And what is electromagnetic energy, or rather, what is light, is a form of electromagnetic energy, and we are a form of electromagnetic energy. Therefore, we truly are light beings.
Yes. Sounds so simple, but it's so nice to have it described by you, Mark.
Oh, thank you. Well, a lot of people say, well, that's really hard to understand. It's like, you think? I mean, it did take Albert Einstein to figure this out. And let me tell you, Max Planck and Werner Heisenberg, pretty bright people too. And but it is complex on one hand, but it's very simple on the other. We are all energetically interconnected, and human beings really need to understand this. Because once you do, you realize that we have more in common than we have that is different.
I think one reason why this is so hard is because we are so intelligent, and we are kind of put apart from the rest of the planet's functions, so to say. It's easy to understand that a flower and a plant is part of universe because it grows out of the soil. But we are kind of, above it all,
Yeah.
we think. Center of the universe, as many would think, perhaps. But yeah, I hope that with this kind of books that you read, that you write, and that we know that our readers really, really appreciate, that we come a step further.
I appreciate that, because the more you work with the spiritual, you realize that there's no hell.
No.
Now, I was raised in the Catholic faith, and it was like, and it's funny, it's like heaven is for Catholics, purgatory is for Protestants, and hell is for everybody else. Okay. And I'm making a joke there, but that was kind of, how I was raised when I was a child. But what we see in working with spirits is that the other side, what I call the afterlife frequency, has many different frequencies, just like the electromagnetic spectrum, just like radio waves. Radio waves are also another form of electromagnetic energy. And hell, where people are afraid that they're going to be cast into this pit of fire for all of eternity. And I explain in the afterlife frequency, I go into where the concept of hell originated, and how, in the spiritual sense, it doesn't exist. I believe it does exist here on earth. And I don't believe in the devil as a spiritual entity. Instead, I believe in the ego, the human ego. You see, the brain did not create the spirit. The brain's like a computer hard drive. Professor Hans-Peter Dor from the Max Planck Institute of Physics in Germany has stated that the brain is like a computer hard drive, and that when the hard drive dies, we don't lose this consciousness. In this way, we're immortal. So what we've been seeing in the past, I would say, certainly the past 20 years, is that quantum physicists are coming out and saying, like Dr. Michio Kaku, the originator of string theory, that there's not just one universe, but several multiverses. is that eternal life does not violate the laws of physics, because energy, the electromagnetic soul, is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. And I think that once we begin to understand this, it's very, very comforting.
Yeah, I agree with you. So you are an attorney, lawyer, and a medium in the same body, spirit, soul. So it's kind of contradictive, some would think. So
It-
tell us a little bit, how is it to have you met hardship in that, in our society, that you are both, how obvious is it that you are a medium and a lawyer at the same time? And have you been able to use this gift in your work?
um, Well, just for the record, I'm focusing entirely on my mediumship work now,
Yeah.
but I did practice law for over 20 years. I've tried all types of trials, from small, criminal cases to murders to complex civil litigation. And I wasn't public about being a medium, but in the legal profession, I always had a reputation for being a little bit strange. Because people would say, you seem to know things about other people that you shouldn't know.
Mhm.
And certainly, having these abilities is part of my skill set. But when people say, how can you be a lawyer and a medium? Well, both of them involve helping people. As an attorney, you have to help people who are going through the worst times of their lives. Maybe they've lost a loved one. Maybe they've been arrested, or they've been in a terrible accident. They're injured, or they're being taken advantage of somebody. And as the advocate, I had to help them, stand up for them. As a medium, I help people cope with the death of a loved one by facilitating a communication with them, with their loved ones in spirit. Both professions are about evidence. Certainly, an attorney must have evidence to prove his case. And as a medium, I am what's known as an evidential medium. In other words, when I'm doing a reading for somebody, I just don't say, oh, your grandmother's here and she loves you. Well, everybody's grandmother loves them. Yeah, I have to bring forth pieces of evidence
Mhm.
that I couldn't possibly know. And the reason for that is these pieces of evidence guarantee the authenticity of the contact. And then once we establish the contact, the spirit will begin transmitting other messages which help to bring love, healing, and resolution to that person. So when you asked, did I ever use my abilities as a medium in the practice of law? Well, it's part of me. This is part of my DNA. I was born this way. Both of my parents had these abilities, and I write about them in my books.
Mhm.
And particularly during jury selection. So in a trial, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in Sweden as it is, most of Europe has the jury trial system. And before witnesses are called in the United States and in Britain for sure, um, each side, the prosecution and the defense, and this was a criminal trial, and I was defending a gentleman. Well, it wasn't really a gentleman. He was a big guy that got in a fight with another guy, and he beat up the other guy. And it was a barroom fight. It was something on a Saturday night where two big drunk guys got into a fight, and the guy that lost pressed charges, but it was still a crime of violence. And so the jury selection, we have a French term for it. It's called voir dire, which is to speak the truth. And the point is that the prosecutor gets to ask the prospective jurors questions, and I get to ask the prospective jurors questions, and then we're able to weed out the people with biases and end up, in this case, with a jury of 6 people plus 1 alternate. Okay. So during the jury selection process, it was my turn to ask a question, and I was drawn to this one woman, and I kept feeling a female spirit around her, and I kept feeling this choking. in my throat. So I knew that the woman associated, the spirit associated with this woman must have died from some breathing issue. But this is in trial. Okay, this is not the time to be doing spirit contact. But nonetheless, one of the standard questions you ask is to determine if somebody has a bias, a prejudice. And I said, has anybody here, has anybody on this panel ever been the victim of a violent crime, or maybe a family member been a victim of a violent crime? Well, Alexandra, that woman starts to shake, tears rolled out of her eyes, and she said, a year ago, my sister was in a foreign country when an escaped mental patient strangled her, dismembered her body, and threw her in a trash can like she was garbage.
Yeah.
So I'm standing there like,
Mm.
they did not teach me in law school how to deal with this. And everybody in the courtroom was around. I mean, and then I could see her sister, and that's when I knew, because she was strangled, and I literally had one foot in both worlds.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
if anybody wants to find out what happened, they're going to have to read my first book, Never Letting Go.
Yeah. So thank you for that. The first book you wrote is Never Letting Go. The second book is
Evidence of Eternity.
yeah, and this is your third book.
My third book, and of course I'm always working on the fourth book.
Oh.
And my books, Never Letting Go is a guide on the journey through grief. It helps people cope with the loss of a loved one. And when I was on the Never Letting Go tour, people kept asking me questions about reincarnation, the existence of God, the soul. Do animals have souls? And so that gave me the outline to write Evidence of Eternity. And Evidence of Eternity was received so well. In fact, a lot of men really appreciated it because of the scientific aspects, and people kept saying, Mark, we want more science. And so that's why I wrote The Afterlife Frequency. But as you can see from the book, it is not a boring science book, I promise.
No.
Okay.
We have to talk more about that, because for
Yeah.
me it's not science. It's just, it's support.
It's because you don't want to, or I had to read too many boring books in the practice of law, so I'm not going to do that to my readers. I like to explain the science, but then illustrate it with stories that people can relate to, that are healing stories. And it's such a great honor to be able to help people cope with the loss of a loved one. I do believe in God. I don't believe in God as in the Michelangelo painting, okay, with the guy with the Caucasian male with the long beard, with the scepter, smiting people because you don't tithe 10% to your church. I believe, as Nikola Tesla did, is that what one man or one person calls God, another calls the laws of physics, and that God is an energy that flows through all of us, yet there is a centralized form of intelligence. So to me, we are all interconnected. We are all cells in the body of God, and we are all part of a much larger whole that, while we're here in this human finite form, we may not be completely able to understand, and that's okay.
That's okay. It was hard to get a picture of the internet also before it was born.
Exactly. Think of spirit communication as tapping into the cosmic internet. Yeah,
Exactly.
before the internet was public, I mean, it's like, what? I could just like type something. I mean, when I'm doing research now, I just gave a presentation at an ancient mysteries conference on the tomb of Tutankhamun and all the mysteries and stuff. It was so wonderful being able to access Oxford University's database,
Mhm.
the databases from all over the world, the Egyptian Museum, for images and for information. Because when I was in law school, we had to do all of our research by books, and I did it, and it took hours. And it's amazing because what would have taken me 8 or 9 hours in a law library would take maybe about 15 minutes now on the internet. So that's one of the positive aspects of technology.
Yeah. Can we go back to your parents and the fact that you are a fourth generation medium? So, and you have roots from, was it Italy?
Italy, and my father's family came from England, and
Yeah.
they came to the or to the colonies at that time in 1693.
Yeah.
And they settled in Pennsylvania and upper state New York, and they were very white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and they lived in the mountains of Pennsylvania. And in fact, they were very conservative members of the Baptist faith. And my mother's family hailed from southern Italy, and they came over to the United States in the early 1900s. And I tracked psychic ability on both sides of my family going back into the 1890s. My father had 4 siblings, 3 sisters and a brother, and he and his sister Marjorie both had mediumistic ability, as did their mother Isabel and their maternal grandmother Grace. And my mother had these abilities, as did her grandmother, my maternal great-grandmother Giovanna. And Giovanna came to the United States from Italy, and in New York City and North New Jersey, she was known as the woman who knows things.
Yeah.
In fact, officials from the Catholic Church used to come and talk to her about theology and about God. Even officials as high-ranking as cardinals would come to meet Giovanna. And what's really interesting, back in 2016, PBS, which is the public broadcasting system in the United States, they did a special called The Italian Americans, and about the millions of Italians that came over to the United States. They actually did an entire segment on Giovanna and
Oh,
and referenced her psychic abilities. And I remember watching it on television, and on every commercial break, one of my cousins would be calling me, "Did you see that?" So we were all talking because, everybody knew about Giovanna, the woman who knows things. And then, of course, my mother, Jean, her name was Jean, but everyone called her Jeannie. And my mother was just amazing. She could see spirits, she could foresee future events. And then my father was a U.S. Navy SEAL. Okay, so talk about a no-nonsense guy, but he had these abilities where he could see auras around people, he could hear spirits, he could pick up on things. And so my parents had me later in life. They had my sister, then my brother, and then I showed up, and they weren't planning on me, but I showed up. And so when I was about 3.5 years old, I started interacting with my invisible friends, except that mommy and daddy could see who I was talking to. And I remember mom
oh,
going, "Oh, he's got it." And my dad was like, "Oh God, he's got it." My father was very worried about me. And when I was 5 years old, I started school, and I was going to be going to Catholic school. And I remember he sat me down and he says, "Don't tell anyone about these things. You can talk to your mother and I about them, but don't tell anybody, because people who see things others don't get taken away."
oh,
I was so
you must be afraid of your ability.
I was terrified,
Yeah,
but I found out why.
yeah,
He wasn't trying to scare me, he was trying to protect me.
right.
About 10 years before I was born, his sister Marjorie, she was married to a very religious man, a religious extremist,
Oh,
okay? And her ability to see spirits frightened him. Well, one day he was a machinist, and he worked at a steel factory in Pennsylvania. And one morning he was getting ready for work, and Aunt Marjorie said to him, "Please don't go to work. I have a terrible feeling something really bad is going to happen." And she said, "I feel it here in the pit of my stomach, which is where your solar plexus is, and that's one of the receptor areas in our body for psychic intuition." And she begged him not to go to work, and they had a big argument. He said, "Fine, I'll stay home." And so they had this argument. Well, that day, Alexandra, a crane was lifting thousands of pounds, thousands of kilograms, maybe about 1,000 kilograms of steel beams, and the cable snapped, and the beams fell, and it crushed the machine shop that he worked in and killed everyone in it.
Oh.
If he had been at work,
Mm.
he probably would have been in the machine shop and been killed.
Mm.
You would think that he would be grateful, but
Yeah.
instead, this frightened him even more, and he conspired with a psychiatrist who diagnosed my Aunt Marjorie as a paranoid schizophrenic that had hallucinations. She was forcibly removed from her home, put into a straitjacket, taken to a mental institution, and subjected to electroshock therapy of her brain for a period of over 6 months. They did so
Oh.
much damage to her brain that she never talked about seeing spirits again. And so I didn't know this when I
Of
was a
course.
little boy, and I found out about it when I was in my late teens. And I found out when we heard that Aunt Marjorie had died. And that's why my father was so afraid, because in those days, people with my abilities were feared and seen as doing the work of the devil. And that's just the paranoid nonsense from religions that are trying to dominate our spirituality and our connection with God. And it is so nice that now in the 21st century, this is a much more open topic. And yes, there's still resistance to it. And yes, there's still religious people that, oh God, there's devils and all that nonsense. But I think in time, that's going to fade away, and spirit communication is going to be accepted as a reality.
Mm. Yeah, I believe that too. Thank God. Yeah. So, thank you for that. You have been a medium all your life. What about your siblings? Are they also gifted?
Yes, to an extent. My brother anticipates future events. It was like I was talking to him on the phone one time, and he said, "I have this bad feeling that my son's going to get cut. He's going to get cut somehow." And I go, "Well, that doesn't sound good. Maybe you should check on him." And then all of a sudden I hear in the background of the phone, Dad, I cut myself." He was his son was outside working with he was trimming something, and the blade slipped and sliced his hand open. And I
Mm.
remember my brother going, "Gotta go," click. So yeah, he foresees events, and my sister has that we call that precognitive ability. Precognition is foreseeing future events, but neither of them appear to be mediums. So, and with
What's the
mediumship,
difference?
well, yeah, that's a very good question. I'll make it very easy. If you want to know about your career, love life, and future, see a psychic. If you want to talk to dead people, see a medium. Okay. And I know that's very simplistic, but there's different forms of psychic ability. There's people who are medical intuitives. There's people who try to foresee future events. And then there's the psychic ability of mediumship, where we're tuning into a higher frequency, which is spirits. And every medium has psychic ability, but not every psychic has mediumistic ability. However, as I explain in the afterlife frequency, everyone is capable of having a psychic or mediumistic experience. We all have the same physiology and we have the same equipment, just some people are better at it than others. It's like some people are better tennis players. Bjorn Borg, all right, one of the best tennis players of all time. Look, I can play tennis, but I will never be a Bjorn Borg, okay?
Of
Um,
course.
yeah, I can do math, but I'll never be a Stephen Hawking. I can play guitar. I'm never going to be an Eric Clapton. But the thing is, everybody can still do this. And in the afterlife frequency, I explain how, I call it the raft technique, teach people how to recognize, accept, feel, and trust the signs and messages around you. And once you start working with the raft technique, you'll see that it'll become second nature. So even though you may not end up being a medium, you'll be open to the contact.
Exactly. So it's kind of a crash course to learn to communicate with, or at least listen to spirits, but also it's a way to, how do you say, accept the
Yes,
existence of, yeah,
certainly.
yeah. And that's what we want, I think. I think that's what a lot of people want. They want
Yeah.
to be confirmed that the spirit world exists. Mm.
Yes, they do, because the most painful thing is thinking that someone that meant so much to you has just disintegrated into nothing,
Mm.
that they cease to exist. And I hear people say that to me all the time. Well, I don't think you can do that. I don't believe it. And it's like, okay. And some people, if I try to do a reading, they're so closed about
Mm.
it. They don't want to hear anything. And then other people are going to be like, wow, how did you know that? And it's always fascinating what comes through. I mean, recently I was doing a reading for a woman and her grandfather came through and I was describing him and she said, yes, that's him. And then I said, there's another man with him. I said, he looks like Walt Disney. And I'm like, that's not something, that you see all the time. I go, Walt Disney. And she goes, oh, well, my grandfather used to work with Walt Disney. He was an animator. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we're talking to Walt Disney. you know and so as much as I do this, it's a surprise for me too, but it was
Yeah.
really great that Walt Disney came through. But there are several things that happen. Sometimes I don't completely understand
Mm.
everything that is coming through. Like I was doing a reading for these two women, and their mother had died and her spirit came through and she began to talk to me about their other sister. Now, their other sister's alive and well, but she wasn't present during the reading. And the mom kept giving me the name Michael. And then she kept saying October 11, October 11, October 11. And one of the sisters, she said, come on, Mark, everybody knows somebody named Michael. Well, of course, it's a very common name, but they couldn't think of anyone significant named Michael, and they could not think of anything in October, specifically October 11th. I said, don't worry about it, okay? Because if you strain and struggle, I got to figure this out right now, it creates a block. I said, just make a note of it. Let's move on. Well, Alexandra, about 6 weeks later, they contacted me and they said, Mark, we figured out the message.
Mm.
10 days after we did the reading with you, it was October 11th. And that is the day that Hurricane Michael hit our sister's hometown in Florida. And she went into labor 3 weeks early and had her baby girl during Hurricane Michael on October 11th. Okay, now it's making sense. You see,
Mm.
spirits can see future events, and their
Mm.
mother's spirit was coming through. And because when I was talking to them, I said, I think your mother was trying to tell us, let's get your sister out of there. But the thing is, at the time of the reading, Hurricane Michael had not even formed.
Yeah.
So why would anyone think of Michael? And October 11th was not their sister's due date. Her due date was in November. So why would anyone have thought of that? So that's why in the afterlife frequency, I explain how readings are like a flower. They bloom, they blossom, and they unfold. And it can take hours, days, weeks, even longer. I recently was doing a reading for a man, and before we started, he said, "I want to thank you for saving my son's life." And I said, "What?" He said, "About a year and a half ago, you did a reading for my wife, and it was a telephone reading. And you said that her father's spirit said that our son has a rare defect of his heart, and it has to get checked." And I said, "Okay." Well, they thought about this after the reading, and they said, "Well, let's get our son checked." He had a rare defect of his heart, and he had just gotten back from the Cleveland Clinic, which is in Cleveland, Ohio. It's one of the best heart centers in the United States, and they put in an artificial heart valve. And the surgeon said, "I don't know how you knew to have his doctor look for this, because unless you look for this specifically, there would be no indication. But if we didn't do this, your son would have died." And so that is part of the gift of spirit communication. People think, "Oh, this is demonic and evil." Really? Okay. So when a spirit comes through and tells you to check your son's heart because he has a rare defect, and he does, and it saves his life, that doesn't sound very demonic to me.
No.
The problem with people misunderstanding spirit contact, messages from spirits, remember the soul, the source of universal love. Messages from spirits are all about love, healing, protection, and resolution. So they will come in and they may see something and intervene to let you know about it. Whenever I see in the media and they talk about these terrorists with their spiritual advisors to blow up buildings, it really makes me angry when they refer to a religious fanatic as spiritual. They are not spiritual, they are religious. And there's a big difference between the two. Nothing spiritual is about anger, bigotry, hatred, and violence. But the
No.
ego, which is created by the human brain, the ego edging God out, it's all about me, 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 me. That's where these people think this is a spiritual message when it isn't. That's what's being created by your brain. But the soul is only housed in the brain, not created by it. So that's the difference. When people think they're getting a vision to go create death and destruction, no, that's coming from them.
Thank you, darling. My husband just got me coffee. I'm sorry for the
No,
interruption.
no, no, no worries.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just heard, I just listened to what you said about the ego a little bit deeper than I perhaps was before. So edging God out, that's the ego. I love
Ego,
that.
edging. Yeah, I don't know what that would be in Swedish, but I'm sure there would be a similar acronym, a similar term. You see, when we talk about the brain is an extremely important organ. I mean, it's the control center for our body, but it did not create our consciousness. And this is not some new age concept or even neuroscientists. You look at a book on neuroscience on the human brain, it may be 900 pages long. There might be one paragraph on consciousness. Neuroscientists say that the brain creates consciousness through chemical reactions and electrical impulses, but they cannot explain how. That's because consciousness is not created by the brain. It's only hosted. It's like a computer hard drive. You know, your computer hard drive, for everybody listening, your computer did not create the operating system. It did not create Windows. It did not create the data on it. It only hosts it. And so when the computer hard drive crashes, just like Professor Hans-Peter Dorff from the Max Planck Institute in Germany said, when the hard drive slash brain dies, we don't lose the consciousness. It's merely uploaded to the afterlife frequency.
Yeah. That's that's really good explanation. Thank you. So you talk about collective consciousness in the book.
Think
Can
of your,
you
yeah,
it's an expansion of the consciousness, and I think it's very interesting. It's a hot topic
it
uh,
is.
in the in the research area of science. So let us hear your story.
Think of your soul, your electromagnetic soul, as an energetic drop of water. And when we die, that drop of water leaves the brain, the hard drive, and plunges into the eternal sea of souls. That's the collective consciousness. You're still an individual. It's just that now you're energetically linked to other spirits, to other spirits, to other spirits. People talk about in near-death experiences when they die and their EMS, their soul leaves their body, they go through a tunnel into the light, and what do they see? They are greeted by loved ones,
Mm.
people that have deathbed visions, people who are dying and they start talking about deceased loved ones around them. This is not some hallucination. What's happening is their electromagnetic soul is beginning to expand and leave their body, and its frequency is now interphasing with the frequency of the other side of the afterlife frequency, and that's why they're able to perceive these spirits. And so the collective consciousness is this eternal sea of souls. And I believe that this is all part of what we were talking about earlier, our ability to understand God is we're all, whenever you hear that we're all cells in the body of God, this is what the collective consciousness is. This is also why during readings, a spirit will come through and transmit to me information that far exceeded the scope of anything that person knew in this life. This is also how spirits will bring up future events like Hurricane Michael and the day the baby's going to be born, because as part of the collective consciousness and as part being electromagnetic energy, they're able to foresee future events. According to Albert Einstein's theory of relativity and all the quantum physicists since Einstein, on the subatomic quantum level, time does not exist. It's all past, present, future. And I explain this in much greater detail in the book. So that's why, and that's how psychics and mediums are capable to tune into future events, is because you're aligning with that quantum level. So the collective consciousness, it's really great because I get a lot of medical information, and I'm so thankful that they transmit these type of messages. I wrote a story for a magazine that I write for called Best Holistic Life, and it was about prophecy and foreseeing future events. So I was doing an event, and it was in front of about 100 people, and I was drawn to this woman. She was probably like maybe 50 years old, and she had a teenage daughter. And her father's spirit came through, and all of a sudden her father focused on his granddaughter and said, "Don't get in that car. Do not get in that car. Do not go to the concert." And the girl's like, "Oh, come on. I'm going to a concert next week with my friends." And her mother looks at her like, "Oh, no, you're not." Okay. But her grandfather's spirit says, "Don't get in that car. Don't go to the concert." Okay. Well, a year later, I was back at the same venue, and I was autographing copies of the Afterlife frequency, actually. And this mother and her daughter walked up to me and they said, "Do you remember us from a year ago? You said, 'Don't get in the car.'" And I'm like, "Yeah, I do remember that." The girl explained to me, she said, "Well, I didn't go to the concert, but I called my friends. My friend was going to, was driving. And I said, this psychic said, 'Don't get in the car, be real careful.'" So she said, my friends still went to the concert, but they were so paranoid that they were driving really slowly. Okay. And all of a sudden, all four of the tires on their car popped. What had happened was it was on a highway, and apparently there was a truck, and a bunch of roofing nails that they use for making roofs, had fallen off the truck. They ran over it, and all 4 tires blew out. And the police showed up, and the police officer said, if you girls had been going fast, you probably would have flipped and been killed. So her grandfather's spirit conducted what I call spirit intervention, where a spirit intervenes, and he didn't want his granddaughter in that car, and luckily she warned her friends, so 4 girls' lives were saved through
Nice.
spirit contact.
Yes, we love when that happens. But also, it's also intervening with the path of life. So if you would want to see it in a bad sense, which I don't like, but still, it kind of changes the events of life.
Or does it? You see, in the thousands of readings I've done, I see that there's a day we're coming in and a day we're leaving this world. What we have choice over is what we do on the time in between. So maybe those 4 girls, the car would have flipped and they would have lived, but maybe they would have been severely injured and even paralyzed. They still would have lived the same amount of time, but because of the intervention, they did not have to suffer that type of physical trauma or problems. Because one of the hardest things that I do, and I work with an organization called Helping Parents Heal. It's a global organization, and I believe they do have affiliations in Sweden. Helping Parents Heal is dedicated to just that, helping parents cope with the loss of a child. And so many parents will come to me, Alexandra, and say, why did my child have to die?
Yeah.
Losing a child's the most difficult. It's unimaginable. It's excruciating. It's horrible. It destroys our entire pattern of life. We're supposed to go before the children. Unfortunately, that's not what happens. And in all of the thousands of readings that I've done, all the spirits of the children say, that was the day I was supposed to die. But like the pebble that falls into a pond and causes concentric circles, that child's death affects a lot of people, and it is how we react to the death. See, you can start drinking, doing drugs, getting angry, being, isolate yourself, engage in a lot of negative behaviors. Or you can pursue a spiritual path, understand the afterlife, change how you do things. If I can, I'd like to tell a story.
You can.
I used to ride the bus every day with this girl named Mary. And we went to Catholic school together, college, and we knew each other our whole lives. But I hadn't seen Mary in probably 15 years. And I got a call from her one day, and she said, Mark, my son Mikey is in intensive care. We found him face down in the pool. Now, what had happened was her son, he was a beautiful young man. He had a younger sister and older brother, and he was a star athlete. And one day he started having double vision. Long story short, he went through brain scans, and they detected a tumor in his brain called diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma, DIPG. It happens in children and young adults. It's a tumor on the brainstem. There are no cures for it, and it is fatal. And he put up as good a fight as he could. He went through chemotherapy, every treatment possible. And one day, he'd come back from treatment, and he was at Mary's house, and she went out to the store. And when she came home, they found him floating face down in their pool. So he was in intensive care, and he was still physically alive, but the doctors were saying that he was brain dead. And his spirit came through to me on the phone and said, you're not ready to make the decision yet. You will know when you are, and I am with Mother Mary. Now, at first, I thought Mother Mary meant like Mary, the mother of Jesus. And Mary said, "Oh my God, my grandmother's name was Mary, and she was really close with Mikey, okay, with her son Mikey." I said, "Okay." And then he wants to talk to his father, and he said, "Giorgio and Greggy." And his father said, "Giorgio? Oh my God. That was a joke. He used to call me Giorgio." Now, I didn't know this. Okay, so now we know that we're talking to a spirit. And I kept getting Greggy, Greggy. And they said, "Well, we're not sure what Greggy is." Then they called me back the next day. And once again, Mikey came through and he said, "You're ready now." And he said, "I'm with Mary." And so they terminated life support and their son passed. But before he passed, he said, "When you see Mars, think of me." Okay. Well, that night, Mary and her husband, his name was Mike, they called their son Mikey. They were at home and there was a knock on the door. And they answered the door and there was a young man there. And they hadn't seen the young man in over 10 years. And he was a foster child that they had taken in and raised. And he said, "I don't know why, but I just felt I needed to be here." They said, "Mikey died." He goes, "Oh my God." And then they realized this young man's name was Gregory, but they called him Greggy. And Mikey's spirit had told them Greggy would show up.
Yeah.
A month later, Mary and her husband had their other two children over, and they were having a barbecue, and it was a real cloudy night. And all of a sudden, they were all talking about Mikey and how much they loved him and missed him. And all of a sudden, the clouds cleared, and there was a bright orange star in the sky. And their other son, Sam, said, "Hey, look, it's Mars." And then they realized, when you see Mars, think of me.
Oh, I get all teary-eyed.
Oh, that's a hard one. It's a hard one for me too. And the thing is, and I've been honored to conduct more readings for Mary, because she's such a dear friend, and she and her husband and her family, they've been to Washington, D.C. to raise awareness for children with cancer. And they started a DIPG research foundation at the University of Florida's Medical Center. But his spirit came through and gave verifiable facts. His father's nickname, Giorgio, that he was with his great-grandmother, Mary, that Greggy, who showed up, who didn't even know why, he just felt he was directed there, obviously by Greggy. And then, so that was one future event. And then, when you see Mars, think of me. And who knew they were going to be having a barbecue just when Mars was particularly bright in the sky that night. And so things like this are part of evidential mediumship. When people say, "Well, that's a coincidence," really? Here's another
So many
coincidence.
things.
And I was doing a reading for a woman, and her mother came through and started talking about a 7-year-old boy. And she said, "Well, I don't have a son, but my sister does, and he's 7." I said, "Your mother said that your nephew, eyes, I'm getting headaches and eye strain." She goes, "Well, he's been complaining of headaches." I said, "You have to take him to the eye doctor." And now I'm hearing the Little Richard song, "Tutti Frutti, ah, Rudy, Tutti Frutti, ah, Rudy." And she goes, "Okay." She goes, "I know who Little Richard was, but that doesn't make any sense." I go, "That's okay." So I'm laughing. So 2 weeks later, she calls me and she goes, "Mark," she said, "I told my sister about we need to take my nephew to the eye doctor." And she said, "Let's do it because, he's saying he can't see his homework and, everything's blurry." So she said, "I went with my sister and my nephew to the eye doctor. And as soon as we walked into the doctor's office, on the radio, it started playing Tutti Frutti, Ah Rudy by Little Richard." Now, for those of you who say that's a coincidence, I think we're past 1,000,000,000 to 1 that would be the exact song. Now, let's look at my electromagnetic soul theory. Her mother's spirit is an EMS, electromagnetic soul, and On the quantum electromagnetic level, time does not exist, so spirits can perceive what we call future time. Radio waves are another form of electromagnetic energy. So what was going on here is, hey, my grandson needs glasses. You get him there, and to prove to you that you're in the right place at the right time, I'm going to tell you what song's going to be playing the second you walk in the doctor's office. That's what's happening. And that's why the electromagnetic soul theory is so important to understanding spirit contact.
Smart. You're good at connecting the dots.
Thank you. Well, that's I often wonder why me, and I don't think that I'm special or but I'm an attorney. I've spent my entire life doing research, connecting the dots, understanding that things have to be substantiated through facts, through evidence, through sound scientific research. And so I had all these skills and my ability to write and articulate about it. And so, for whatever reason that I don't fully understand, I believe that, well, I do know what my life's mission is. And I'll conclude with this story. I was very close to my mother, who was a very gifted psychic medium. And when she died, my life was just crushed. And I remember the day before she passed, I was in my office and she called me and she said, I made spaghetti for lunch. Why don't you come over? And I thought, all right, because she lived about 5 miles from my office, and I went there. We had a beautiful lunch. She made this wonderful spaghetti with broccoli rabe. It's Southern Italian dish. And she looked tired, and she was there with my dad, and I hugged her and kissed her before I left, because I always hugged and kissed my parents. And she said to me, I love you so much. She goes, we have 3 such great kids, and I'm so happy you've been my son. And I said, well, I love you too, Mom. And the next day I was in court, and the judge's secretary came into court and said, Mark, we need you right now. And they took me into the judge's office, and on my phone, my secretary was on the phone crying, saying, your dad called, your mom died. And I was devastated. In about 2 weeks after that, I was driving back to my law firm from court. And those waves of grief, it's like a tsunami. Sometimes you think you have it okay, then all of a sudden, boom, you get hit by it. And I was having one of those. So I pulled over in a parking lot of a store, and I thought, let me get my act together before I go to my office. I can't walk in the office crying. And all of a sudden, Alexander, there was a flash of light in the car. And I looked to the passenger side, and for maybe 3 seconds, I saw my mother's silhouette in this beautiful silver white light. And her voice filled my head, and she said, Mark, you have the gift of mediumship so that you will not be crushed by grief. But now you must help those who are suffering with theirs. All right, so I'm trying to process this, and then I hear her next message. It is your life's mission to help people understand that God exists, the soul exists, that we can communicate with souls, and that we will be reunited with each other in the light you call God. I am sweating from head to toe, and I remember I sank back into the seat of my car, and all I could say, Alexandra, was, okay. And I know, and I'm trying to process this. And look, I mean, I've been around spirit contact my whole life, but this was different. This was very heavy duty. And I'm thinking, I can't tell people this. They're going to think I'm crazy. And then that thought faded away, and I realized my life had just changed, and it was never going to be the same. Now, I was thinking about, people who say that, oh, I was on a mountaintop and I had this spiritual experience. Well, mine was more like a fire hose right to the face. And and if you've spent time around Italians, you understand that's what it's like. Okay.
Yes. Fire. Right.
And my life changed. Within a year, I had left the practice of law behind. My first book, Never Letting Go, came out, and I have never looked back. And I thank God every day for being the custodian of this ability. I don't look at like I have this ability. I look at it as I am the custodian of this, and I do my very best to help people understand that the divine power we call God exists, that heaven, the afterlife exists, that our souls are immortal living spirits, that we can communicate with electromagnetic souls, and that we will all be reunited in the light, the energy of the afterlife frequency when it is our time to leave this material world.
Yeah. Good conclusion. Do you have children, Mark?
I have not been blessed with children, but I've got a niece and nephew and 3 little nieces and a brand new little nephew. And one of the nieces I live fairly close to, and she's so cute. She's 7 years old, really smart. And she walked into her parents' dining room with all my books one day, and she put them on the table and said, "Why is Uncle Mark on all these books? Is he famous?" And it's funny because I don't think I don't look at myself in that respect. And her mother, who's my niece, she said, "Well, Uncle Mark is an author." And the thing is, because my niece goes to Catholic school, so
Eh,
please don't go to Catholic school and say, "My Uncle Mark sees dead people." So they explained that Uncle Mark writes books. And then she saw me on television and she goes, "Why is Uncle Mark on television?" So it's very interesting interacting with these beautiful children.
yeah. Do you think they have the ability to carry on what you have started?
Um, it remains to be seen. It remains to be seen. Um, the other 3 children, the other 2 girls, we all were together at Christmas, and they just gravitated to me, and I was so thrilled. And one of the greatest joys, it may sound ridiculous, but they said, "Uncle Mark, will you read us a story?" And so I got Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas,
Mhm.
and that had to be one of the best Christmas experiences of my life, was sitting there and reading How the Grinch Stole Christmas to 3 little girls and a baby, and they were hanging on my every word. So, and it's all about love.
Yeah.
Love is the energy that makes life worth living. It's what binds us, unites us. And I pray every day that the ego-driven world leaders that want to conquer and inflict horror and damage, if they start realizing that they love their children more than they hate their enemies, this world will be utopia.
That's very true. Should we make that the last words for this fantastic interview, Mark?
I believe so. So I want to thank you, Alexandra. I want to thank everybody who's tuned into this.
Your new Swedish audience, perhaps.
My new Swedish audience, thank you so very much. And
Thank
may,
you.
may the divine bless you and guide you every day of your life.
Thank you so much, Mark. Have a good time, and we'll meet again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alexandra. Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.